Anglers are always asking what bait casting reel they should buy for bass fishing, and I've got some reels here from $100, 150, 180 up to 240, and really it's a matter of your personal preference, what you're going to be using it for, what application you plan to fish, and then also what your budget is. In this video, we're just going to talk about some of the criteria that will help you decide what bait casting reel works for you. So choosing a bait caster, the first aspect I'm going to look at is gear ratio. The common types of gear ratios that you'll find bait casters in, usually there's a 5-speed, a 5:1 to 1, a 5:3 to 1. That's a low gear ratio. That type of reel handles torque really well, so it's really good for baits that pull real hard, say a deep, heavy swim bait, deep diving crankbaits, big spinner baits, something that's going to pull real hard on you. Just like with your fishing boat, you're not going to pull your boat with a little sports car. You're going to pull it with a big truck because it's made to handle that weight and handle that torque. Just like with a low gear ratio, a high gear ratio reel is good for taking up line real quick. And I use that a lot with baits that I fish with a rod. If I'm working a frog with a rod and one strikes, I want to be able to take up all the slack real quick and set a hook. If I'm flipping and pitching line out, or I'm casting a worm or something like that, moving it with a rod and something bites, I'm going to reel down real quick, take up the slack and get a good hook set. That's when I'm going to use a high gear ratio reel. If you're just getting into bass fishing, a great middle of the road reel would be a 6:4 to 1 reel. It can handle taking up line pretty quick, but it also has enough power to be able to handle the pull of like a deep diving crankbait. The next point to consider in choosing a bait caster is the diameter of the spool, or the spool size of the reel. You've got, the reels come in different sizes. They might be 100s, 150, 200s. Those are talking about how much line the reel can hold. And where that's important is if you're going to use bigger line and you need to be able to make long casts and need to be able to take up line a lot faster, a bigger spool reel is better suited to that. The other thing to consider is if you're using something like fluorocarbon, it's something that might be real coily in those higher diameters. A bigger spool reel will actually, those coils will be bigger. It'll make your line more manageable using a larger size reel with things like fluorocarbon. And the third point I would consider when buying a bait casting reel is the actual braking and tension systems. There is some confusion with people with the braking versus the tension knob on a bait caster. The easiest way I can explain it to you is the tension knob controls your line at the beginning of your cast. The braking system controls your line at the end of your cast. And what I mean by that is when I tighten this down all the way, my lure won't even drop off the end of my rod. So as I loosen that up, it starts letting the line off the spool to start a lot easier, my tension knob. Now when I get the bait out there in the middle of a cast and it's starting to feather down and land, you start getting extra coils. That's where your braking system comes in. You dial your braking down. Say if there's a big wind blowing in my face, I'm going to turn my brakes up because I know that wind is going to stop my bait sooner than that, which is going to, in turn, my spool is going to try to keep spinning at that same speed even though it's being stopped out at the end of the cast. Those brakes will start to engage as that reel spool spins faster. That way you can control feathering the bait down and it landing in the water without having a bad overrun on your reel. So your tension knob and your braking system together, what they're made to do is control backlashing with a reel. Most people have the question, how do I get started with the tension and braking systems? What I tell people is to tighten your tension knob down pretty tight, depress the thumb bar to engage the spool, and then start backing it off. Just shake your rod a little bit while you do that. And as it starts to let your line down, when your lure hits the water and it doesn't have a loop form out, that's a pretty good starting point for getting your tension right on your reel. As you get better with casting, you're going to want to back that tension off even more. That's going to give you greater distance and more control with your thumb controlling your cast rather than the tension controlling your cast. So my final criteria for choosing a bait caster would be in the materials of the reel. That would include the ball bearings and then also what the reel frame and side plates are made of. The more ball bearings you have in a reel, the smoother they can make the reel, the better casting they can make the reel. It performs better with more ball bearings. Same thing with the materials. They can make the reel much lighter if they make it out of material like magnesium, Some aluminum reels can be very light. Composite reels can be light, but composite's essentially copolymer plastic, so it's not quite as durable as aluminum or magnesium. Magnesium's obviously the most expensive because it is a light material, but it's also very strong. So yeah, you know, you get a magnesium reel with 11 ball bearings. Yes, it's going to be pricey, but it is a performance reel. It is going to be the smoothest reel, the lightest reel, and you know, for using a fishing reel all day, you pay to have that performance. But likewise, you can find a great performing reel at those lower mid-range price points made out of composite, made out of aluminum, maybe with composite side plates and maybe say 5 or 6 ball bearings. So you can find a good reel from everywhere in between $100 to $600. You might want to check out some of the reviews we've done on Wired to Fish on reels to see what we think about some of the different price points, budgets, and materials that go into these baitcaster reels.